What would happen if the owner of an entire movie theater chain had to go undercover as a janitor just to stop a robbery planned by the very employee everyone thought was a model staff member? Miles Donovan stared into the reflection in the employee restroom mirror, trying to get used to the new version of himself he had just constructed. The finely tailored suit was gone, replaced by a wrinkled gray janitor's uniform. His neatly gelled hair now hid beneath an old baseball cap, and his face was covered in patchy stubble like a drifter desperate for hourly work. 20 years building the Monarch Theater chain from humble screenings in a small town to a presence across multiple states, and now he held a mop like he was starting all over again. "Remember why you're doing this," Miles whispered, gently pressing the fake name tag on his chest that read Doug, an alias born from an anonymous email 3 weeks ago that had kept him up every night since. The email was short, but haunting. It detailed accusations of a toxic work environment, discrimination, employees exhausted from unpaid overtime, and most disturbingly, negligence by the manager of Branch 1, the very theater he once called his proudest achievement. Miles had stopped trusting internal audits long ago. This time, he needed to see for himself. He needed to feel what the space was like when the owner was away. So he chose the night shift. Fewer people, less attention, more chances to hear the truth. He pushed the cleaning cart down the hallway leading to the main lobby. The scent of buttered popcorn drifted through the air, and the soundtrack from an action film echoing from Theater 3 stirred something in him. Memories of his early days building the company came rushing back, but that pride was soon replaced by unease as a whisper floated from behind a large movie poster. "I told you there's no other way." A shaky female voice. Miles froze, kept his head low, and pretended to scrub a coffee spill while his ears focused. Behind the poster stood 2 young women in Monarch uniforms. One was taller, with curly hair and a name tag that read Zoe. Her hands clenched so tightly they turned white. The other, smaller and younger looking, was named Raina. Raina's voice was soft as wind. "If we get caught, we're going to jail. You know that, right?" Zoe didn't respond at first. She clenched her jaw, then exhaled in a choked breath. "If I don't get the money by Tuesday, they'll break Jamie's legs. He's only 14. Miles gripped the mop handle, his heart caught between reason and instinct. He had come to investigate workplace injustice, not to uncover a criminal plan. But everything Zoe said, about an $8,000 hospital bill, a mother working 3 jobs and still coming up short, and a loan shark named Dane Malrick, struck a painful chord. He had been poor. He had watched his mother cry in silence when she couldn't afford to pay for his father's medication. He knew that feeling of helplessness wasn't just a personal tragedy, it was the symptom of a system that had failed. In the dim shadows of the movie theater, Miles Donovan realized he wasn't just standing in the middle of a planned crime. He was standing at the threshold of a truth he had never dared to face before. That the very business he had built may have unknowingly created cracks wide enough to swallow people whole. And that, more than anything else, was what truly terrified him. Miles sat silently in the corner of the employee break room, his eyes drifting past the dusty glass window to where Zoe stood wiping down the popcorn counter in the distance. Under the weary hum of neon lights, her face was focused, diligent. But Miles now saw what most managers had overlooked. A sister fighting to stay upright in a world pushing her to the edge. In one hand, he held a phone with the power to call the police. In the other, a confidential personnel file discreetly forwarded to him by his head of security through the company's internal system. Zoe Hart, 19 years old, hired 8 months ago, had never missed a shift and held the highest customer service rating in the entire theater. Raina Cruz, 18, with a similarly clean record, quiet, hardworking, not a single complaint filed in her 4 months on the job. People like them, how did they end up here? Miles decided not to act yet. Instead, he stayed in the building longer, under the guise of his janitor persona, paying attention to every detail, every tense glance. He noticed that whenever the manager, Jared Bolton, walked by, both girls immediately stiffened, standing straight, eyes lowered as if bracing for reprimand. And as he feared, Jared did not disappoint. "Zoe, the floors last night looked like a battlefield," he growled in passing, without so much as a glance in her direction. "Don't make me say this again." "Yes, sir. I'm sorry," Zoe replied so softly that Miles had to lean in to catch it. After the last screening, with the theater mostly empty, Miles lingered near the restrooms to observe. He saw Zoe staying back after her shift, not eating, not resting, sipping only a few drops of water before continuing to sweep. In that quiet moment, Raina came over and handed her half a granola bar. "Do you think working double shifts is really going to help Jamie live a few more years?" Zoe asked, voice trembling, eyes glistening. Raina said nothing, simply took her friend's hand in silence, her gaze lit with something almost like defiance. That night, Miles left the theater later than usual, weighed down by more than fatigue. He drove but didn't go home. Instead, he pulled into an empty gas station lot. Under the dim yellow lights, he typed a few lines into his phone. If that girl truly believes stealing from the very place she works is her only option, then where does the blame lie? With poverty? With a society that forces people to compromise morality to save their loved ones? Or with me, the employer who failed to build something solid enough to hold her? Miles did not sleep that night. Not because he feared a theft was imminent, but because he was beginning to realize that the theft was no longer the real issue. What needed to be stopped wasn't the action of the two girls. It was the system that was slowly breaking good people into desperation. And if he chose to do nothing, then the first person truly guilty was him. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Miles arrived at the theater dressed in his usual disguise, faded baseball cap, worn-out jacket, and the familiar utility cart in hand. But this time, he wasn't there to clean the floors. He was there to scrub away the mask worn for far too long by one man, Jared Bolton, manager of the original flagship location. No one noticed as Miles quietly stood by the employee room door, pretending to sort trash bins while the morning staff briefing began. Jared, his voice sharp and his gaze brooking no reply, waved the revenue report like a weapon. 20% under target, he barked. Some of you should start thinking about a plan B. He didn't need to name names, but his gaze lingered just a bit longer on Zoe and Raina. Raina's hand tightened around her notebook while Zoe lowered her head, clearly choking back something rising in her throat. "Thompson," Jared snapped suddenly, turning toward Zoe. "Why was your popcorn counter the lowest in sales last night?" "I helped an elderly woman who fell," Zoe replied softly. "While you were playing the hero," Jared said through clenched teeth, "we lost at least 3 orders." The room fell silent. Miles stood less than 5 meters away, feeling a tightness in his chest. Later that afternoon, while cleaning the maintenance closet, Miles overheard Jared on the phone. His tone was completely different, no longer sharp, but calculated. "I cut break times," Jared said. "These kids don't need rest every shift. If one complains, I'll swap them out immediately." A pause, then a mocking laugh. "The owner only looks at reports. And I know how to make reports look good." Miles held his breath, his fingers brushing the phone that was silently recording. He had no more doubts. Jared wasn't just a bad manager. He was actively manipulating the very policies Miles had once laid down with his own hands. Fair wages, employee protections, anonymous feedback channels. All ignored, twisted, or tossed aside. Jared made employees feel guilty for demanding basic respect. And from that environment, things like the planned theft began to take root. Jared wasn't merely a source of fear. He was the catalyst for despair. As evening approached, Miles pretended to check equipment along the back corridor, the very spot where Zoe and Raina were expected to pass the next night. The camera there, just as Raina had said, had been offline for months. No one had fixed it. No one had reported it. Not due to budget cuts, but because Jared had once declared, "That spot doesn't matter." Miles crouched down and picked up a strip of adhesive tape lying beneath the disabled camera, his chest tightening with a heavy intuition. The very person holding the keys to the office had paved the way for crime, not through collusion, but through complete indifference. And that, he realized, was the most terrifying thing of all. Miles returned to the theater that evening with the distinct feeling that time was moving faster than usual. Every passing minute ticked like a countdown to something he could not allow to happen, yet was not ready to stop. He knew Zoe and Raina had finalized their plan for the last screening of the night, a blockbuster film running nearly 2 hours, during which the entire staff would be spread out and the back corridor would be in a perfect blind spot. But what had kept Miles awake the night before was not the risk of losing money, it was the risk of losing 2 lives he should have protected all along. And what hurt more was that his own theater, once built to create opportunity, had now become the backdrop for a mistake that could destroy someone's entire future. He stood behind the utility locker, watching Raina whisper urgently to Zoe by the concessions counter. Mike clocks out at 10:45, exactly like we planned. That gives us 12 minutes, Raina said quickly, eyes unblinking. Zoe nodded, but her hands trembled as she held a paper cup, spilling a few drops of water. Are you sure about this? Raina asked. Zoe stared at the floor and whispered, If I don't do it, Jamie doesn't get another round of treatment. I don't have another way out. Miles turned away, swallowing the tightness rising in his chest. He used to believe that running a business meant optimizing costs, maintaining growth, and keeping reports clean. But in that moment, his business was redefined, not by revenue or performance charts, but by the desperate eyes of a 19-year-old girl who couldn't lift her head, and by a whisper that cut like a blade, I don't have another way out. Before leaving, he quietly made his way to the office area to check on the safe. Jared's office door was unlocked, a sign of carelessness or arrogance. Miles gently opened it and saw the old-style metal safe, fully exposed. He didn't need to check the manual to know that this model typically used a default combination if not changed. And according to what Zoe had said, Jared had never bothered to reset it. He didn't touch the safe. He simply stared at it for a long moment, as if looking into the crack in a wall he once believed to be unshakable. That night, he didn't drive straight home. Instead, he stopped at a 24-hour diner along the road, ordered black coffee, and opened his tablet. The investigation file on Dane Malrick, the loan shark Zoe had mentioned, had just been delivered by the internal security team. Dane had a lengthy record: physical threats, predatory interest rates, and one case where a 13-year-old boy was left permanently injured over a debt of less than $3,000. Miles typed a message. Start forwarding the file to law enforcement, but hold action. I need one more night. Tomorrow night. One final night. A single chance to prevent tragedy, not with handcuffs, but with understanding. Miles knew he was gambling, but he also knew that if Zoe and Raina were arrested tomorrow, what the Monarch Theater would lose would not just be money or reputation, it would be its soul. And to Miles Donovan, that was a price he could never pay. At exactly 10:40 p.m., the clock ticked softly as Monarch Theater faded into dim light, with only a handful of guests trailing out of the final screening room. Every footstep echoed in the empty corridors like the pounding of a heart waiting to break. Miles stood at the corner near the maintenance room, a mop in hand, his eyes fixed on Jared's office door. Beneath his janitor's uniform, the phone in his pocket was quietly recording every movement, not to serve as evidence for prosecution, but to preserve the moment of truth between mistake and redemption. Raina was the first to signal. She approached Mike, the security guard, feigning concern. I think there's smoke in Theater 6. I'm not sure, but it looks strange. As always, Mike sighed, adjusted his belt, and went to check, right on schedule during his usual break. Raina slipped out of camera view without a trace. At the same time, Zoe appeared at the far end of the hallway, her footsteps soft but steady. She stopped in front of Jared's office door and pulled out a small sticky note with a code, 592D4. Those numbers pulsed like her heartbeat, precise, rhythmic, and fragile. The door clicked open, casting a yellow glow into the dark. Zoe inhaled deeply and stepped inside. The safe sat there, unchanged, unlocked by default, like a door of fate waiting to be crossed. Miles didn't move. He knew he could step in and stop it, but he also knew a sudden move could tip off Dane and put Jamie in danger. He had already placed extra security outside, ready to intervene if things got dangerous. But for now, he remained the invisible janitor. Zoe opened the safe. The money appeared, more than she expected. She whispered like a confession, "Jamie, forgive me." She stuffed the cash into her bag, trembling so much that a few bills fell to the floor. Raina whispered through the walkie-talkie, "Mike's almost back. Hurry." Zoe scrambled to pick up the fallen notes, but just then, a floodlight glared against the glass door. Footsteps pounded the floor. Jared. He wasn't supposed to be here, but his car had just pulled into the lot, right on cue. "No way," Zoe whispered, panicked. Through the radio, Raina shouted, "Jared's coming! Get out of there, Zoe!" But Zoe couldn't move. She dropped to the floor, clutching the bag of money, screaming in silence, "Jamie, I'm sorry!" Then, the the silence shattered by a voice, deep, clear, and not belonging to anyone on shift. "Stop right there, Mr. Bolton." Jared froze, confused. "Who's there?" Then he saw the man stepping out from the hallway's shadows, removing a janitor's cap and gloves, standing tall like someone Jared never expected to see here. "Miles?" Jared stammered. "What are you doing?" "I'm the one who laid every brick in this place," Miles said, his voice sharp as a blade. "See? And I just watched you tear it down, piece by piece." Zoe remained frozen, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. Raina rushed to her, standing in front of her like a shield prepared to face the consequences. But Miles didn't look at the girls. He looked straight at Jared, pulled out his phone, and pressed a button. 2 internal security officers emerged from the hallway behind him, silent and expressionless. "You are terminated, effective immediately," Miles declared. "I have full audio recordings, visual footage, witness statements, and documentation of every offense: harassment, unlawful wage cuts, systemic fraud, and creating a toxic work environment. My attorney will contact you first thing in the morning." Jared flushed red, ready to protest, but the security team was already at his side, forcing him to turn away. Once he disappeared through the doors, Miles turned to Zoe and Raina. His voice softened, almost like a whisper. "Now to tell me everything you know about Dane Malrick." The room now held only 3 people: Miles, Zoe, and Raina. The floor was speckled with scattered bills, and the yellow glow from the office lights cast long shadows across Zoe's face, now dulled by tension. She remained on her knees, trembling, clutching the unzipped bag. Raina sat beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders and whispering, "It's over, Zoe. We're not ruined. Not completely." But in their eyes, it seemed neither of them was sure there was still a way back. Miles didn't sit, didn't bend down to comfort them. He stood still, voice low and steady, his gaze unwavering. "I didn't call the police, because I believe in redemption. But trust isn't free. I need your cooperation." Zoe looked up, her eyes red. You're going to help us?" "Not out of pity," Miles replied, "but because you are victims of a system I allowed to decay without noticing." He sat down and placed a folder on the table. "I've had Dane Malrick investigated for the past 48 hours. He's under surveillance. But we need a formal complaint and the threatening messages you received." Zoe hesitated, then slowly unlocked her phone and brought up the messages. One photo made Miles freeze. Jamie, her younger brother, was asleep in a hospital bed, the picture clearly taken from outside a window. The message below read simply, "No payment. Kid loses a knee." Miles clenched his fists. "Your family is under police protection now. The hospital has been alerted. I won't let him lay a finger on Jamie ever again." Zoe broke down. The sobs she had swallowed for countless nights now burst forth into the still air. Raina held her hand. Miles gave them a moment, then opened the folder. "This is the agreement. I'll pay off Dane, every penny tonight. You won't be prosecuted. But in return, you must cooperate with the police, submit the evidence, and sign here." Zoe hesitated. Raina looked at her and gave a quiet nod. "We've come this far, Zoe. Don't let the mistake stop halfway." The pen trembled in Zoe's hand as if it carried the weight of every day she had survived by silencing who she was. But then, the first stroke of ink slid across the page, and then another. By the time she finished signing, a part of the burden had clearly lifted from her small shoulders. Miles closed the folder. "Good, I'll make the call now." He dialed the number and put the phone on speaker. "Malrick is officially being charged," he said. A voice crackled back from the other end, that of an officer. "Roger, the team is in position, moving in." In that moment, just as the sound of sirens echoed faintly in the distance, Zoe collapsed onto Raina's shoulder, no longer a helpless criminal, but a sister who had finally been saved. Miles said nothing more. He rose, quietly stepping into the hallway, leaving behind 2 girls holding each other on a night that could have turned into a tragedy, but instead had become a beginning. 1 month after that fateful night, the first branch of Monarch Theater was no longer a gloomy place where small dreams were held captive. The light in the lobby felt warmer. Not just because the fixtures had been replaced, but because the people within no longer avoided each other's gaze. Miles stood at the end of the hallway, silently observing. No one recognized him. Today he wore a simple button-down shirt, no need to hide, but also no need to appear as a savior. This was a story he had helped begin, but it no longer belonged to him alone. Zoe, in a crisp new uniform, was carefully guiding a new employee through how to process orders on the POS system. Pinned to her chest was a badge that read Assistant Manager, a title not solely given for her actions, but for her resilience. Jamie, her younger brother, sat near the ticket counter, his leg in a brace, eyes glowing as he watched his sister. He was eating popcorn, a once unaffordable treat, with a smile that Miles knew he would never forget. Raina, now the night shift security lead, walked past with a tablet in hand, inspecting the newly reinstalled camera system. She had personally designed the entire security layout with a human-centered approach, monitoring not to control, but to protect. In a meeting 2 weeks ago, she had said, if a camera is placed in the right spot, it doesn't just catch a thief, it can save someone who's losing their way. Miles stepped into the small office near the ticket counter. On the desk was the latest staff survey report. 100% participation, Zoe said with a smile, handing him the results. And for the first time, not a single blank answer. Satisfaction rates had soared. Every employee now earned a living wage. The schedules were more flexible, health benefits kicked in from day one, and the internal hotline, once a formality, was now fully operational. There's one more thing, Raina said as she entered with her tablet. An employee from the central branch just called in. He needs emergency dental surgery but can't afford it. Miles nodded. The emergency fund will take care of it. Whether it's a toothache or a heart condition, pain is pain. No one should have to suffer just because they can't pay for treatment. Miles stepped outside. Customers were lining up for tickets. Staff chatted and helped each other with a spirit of collaboration rather than competition. Jared and his old threats were now just a memory. What Miles saw clearer than ever was this: a business only truly thrives when the people within it feel seen, feel trusted, and are given the chance to grow. He looked toward Zoe and Raina, two girls who had once stood at the edge, made the wrong choice in a moment of desperation but had stopped just in time thanks to a hand that didn't cast judgment but offered understanding. Forgiveness is the beginning, but it is action, the passing of responsibility, that turns forgiveness into rebirth. That morning, Miles received a message from Human Resources. 3 other branches within the Monarch system had just submitted formal requests to adopt all the new policies from Branch 1. He read the message in silence, without a smile, without applause, just a subtle nod, as if a seed had quietly sprouted exactly where it was meant to. What happened at Branch 1 was no longer just an incident. It had become a model, a catalyst for a new kind of leadership, one centered around safety and human dignity. In the internal meeting that day, Raina presented the SafeLine system, a simple yet effective interface that allowed employees to submit anonymous reports, request urgent assistance, or propose improvements. Miles let her speak in full. When she ended with the words, "We shouldn't wait for someone to fall before reaching out a hand," the room fell completely silent. There was no need for applause because everyone had already agreed, in a silence weighted with meaning. That evening, Zoe walked into Miles's office with a printed proposal. On the cover it read, "Jamie Scholarship Fund Proposal." She hesitated. "Jamie wants to study medicine, you know. And I thought if there are other employees with family members who dream like he does, we should do something." Miles opened the file, reading each line carefully. When he reached the section proposing an annual fundraiser involving both customers and staff, he looked up and said softly, "I'll approve it, but on one condition." Zoe paused. "What condition?" Miles smiled. "The name of the fund has to change. Not just Jamie, but Zoe too. Because dreams need someone to nurture them, but hope needs someone to protect it." The next day, Zoe made the first payment toward the restitution agreement Miles had once offered. A small amount, just a few $dozen, but she handed it over with both hands. "Not because of the money," she said, "but because I want to prove to myself that I made the right choice." Miles didn't refuse it, nor did he waive the debt like he once considered, because he understood. True redemption does not require pity. It requires the chance to take responsibility. At that week's staff gathering, held during the lunch hour instead of early morning as before, Miles gave a speech without a microphone, just a short story. He spoke of a young woman who used to sleep in her car, yet still arrived at work on time every day, never letting anyone see the cramped nights or the shivers she endured. Today, she is a manager. She wrote the care policy that this entire company now follows. No one said her name, but everyone knew exactly who he was talking about. As night fell, the Monarch Theater glowed under the gentle golden light of its newly installed marquee. The bold letters read, "Now hiring, join our family." And just beneath, a smaller line whispered, "Where every story deserves to be heard." Miles stood in the parking lot, the night breeze brushing against his shirt, yet inside, he felt lighter than he had in years. Not because of the money saved, not because growth had returned, but because he knew now that if someone cried silently in the break room, someone would come sit beside them. If someone bore pain in silence, there would be a system ready to embrace them. From a distance, Miles spotted Jamie, now without his brace, helping Zoe at the popcorn counter. The boy grinned as he measured the perfect scoop, handing it to a customer with a cheerful, "Enjoy your evening." Zoe stood beside him, her eyes no longer tense like the first day Miles saw her behind the poster, but bright, like someone who had walked through darkness and learned how to hold their own hand. Raina passed by, raising her tablet with the current shift roster and a message from another branch. "Please share security and management protocols from Branch 1. She stopped next to Miles and said softly, "Police say Malric is facing 12 to 20 years. At least 19 other victims have come forward." Miles nodded. No one should ever have to pay for nightmares in silence again. After the shift ended, Zoe approached and held out her phone showing a bank transaction, her second repayment installment. "Not much, but consistent," she said. Miles thought about teasing her to save it for Jamie's scholarship, but instead, he just smiled. Because he knew, for someone who once had no roof over their head, repaying a debt was not just about responsibility, it was a declaration. "I got back up." On the security monitor, Miles quietly watched a short clip from the previous month. Jared yelling at Zoe, Raina standing still like a shadow. Then he switched to a recent feed, Zoe coaching 3 new hires, Raina turning on safety lights in the rear corridor, same camera angle, same hallway, but 2 entirely different worlds. Raina leaned in and said softly, "I'm writing a proposal for a mentorship program. Each new hire would be paired with an experienced team member, not just for job training but for life guidance." Miles smiled and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Send it directly to me. I want that program launched next week." The night deepened. The final showing had begun. Miles stepped outside, gazing at his theater, not just a business model anymore, but a community. A place where people could make mistakes without being discarded. A place where second chances were not privileges, but principles. Zoe called from the doorway, "Good night, boss." Jamie waved, then turned back to the popcorn machine, ready to serve. Miles turned and walked toward his car parked beneath the amber light. As he opened the door, he paused for a beat and looked up at the night sky. Tonight, perhaps for the first time in years, he could sleep peacefully, not because everything was perfect, but because for the first time he knew he had finally started over, the right way. In the world of business, we often measure success by revenue and growth, but sometimes the true metric lies in how we treat the smallest individuals within the system. A great leader is not only someone who makes the right decisions, but someone brave enough to listen to the quietest voices, even when they speak from behind a poster or during a late-night shift. If this story has helped you see the role of compassion and leadership in a new light, please like this video, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story, and leave a comment with the words "Lead with Empathy" to help spread what's right.